Hey everyone, and welcome to this short neoncast-ish video about Blade Runner 2049. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to go. I mean, I always wing these anyway. I open up a couple of tabs that I think are going to be relevant and just hit record and go. But I saw Blade Runner 2049 today, and I knew I was going to want to say at least something about it. I mean, I'm a big fan of Blade Runner, the original, and also of the sort of age and visual sensibility that it helped usher forth in science fiction, both in movies and also like in stuff like anime and also in just in books in general. I mean, it is a member of the sort of exclusive club of things that you can say are kind of the origin of where cyberpunk comes from, and that kind of look. I mean, it's become so iconic. I mean, between that and like the desert post-apocalypse that like stuff like Mad Max helped introduce, Blade Runner and its monolithic, brutalist urban landscapes of the future that are kind of smoggy and rainy and like sort of washed with like neon signs and video screens. And if you go look at images of like Beijing now, it looks like Blade Runner. Now, why do we need a Blade Runner sequel? Blade Runner, I think the biggest thing that survives from it is the whole sort of visual aspect in terms of like the filmmaking. It was very groundbreaking. The movie didn't do well when it came out. It's a movie that gained an audience and gained notoriety after the fact. And I do think that a lot of it survives on how lived in, how alive that world feels. Similarly to something like Star Wars, which was the first movie to really make like a space adventure, otherworldly thing like feel really real. And Blade Runner brought that a little closer to us. It was like a near future dystopia. And you know, at its core, it was like a noir kind of movie with a little bit of, you know, philosophy and ponderings on, you know, what it's like to be human and what is human, whatever. Why do we need a sequel for this? Because other things I think deserve sequels, or at least justify a sequel or a prequel. I don't know. Like, for instance, The Thing, when they said they were going to make a prequel to The Thing, that's a movie that comes with a built-in prequel idea right there. There's a Norwegian station. Everybody's dead there. You know that they originally were the ones that recovered The Thing, and when you see the aftermath of the Norwegian station in The Thing, you know, it's sort of clear what happened there. And so here you got a story that can either be told or not told. And they decided to tell it, and whether or not you like the 2011 version of The Thing or not is, I think, almost immaterial to the fact that unlike other examples of this was a prequel that, you know, had every right to exist. And actually, they did a good job, I thought, of making it kind of fit like a puzzle, right? And they didn't up anything. It was just sort of like, yeah, there was this other side story that's kind of related to this story. You want to know what happened there? Sort of a similar thing happened to them, clearly, because why wouldn't it? Because that's how this alien operates. But why does Blade Runner need a sequel? So I didn't think Blade Runner needed a sequel. And then I heard who was going to be making it. It wasn't going to be Ridley Scott, thank God, but let's not get into my problems with Ridley Scott. They were giving it to Denis Villeneuve. Okay, so Denis Villeneuve, which maybe many people don't know, two movies that he made that a lot of people do know are Sicario and Arrival, which came out last year, and I loved. I thought it was terrific. And he also made Prisoners, and he made this movie Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal. It's a great movie. But I think he's one of the more interesting directors working today. He has this sort of visual sensibility. He knows how to. It's a little hard to explain. Like he has a real good eye to the kind of overarching thing that a director needs to do. Like he knows how to put the right actors in the right places and use them in the right ways and use scenes and stuff like that kind of that glue that puts everything together. And like I said, because Blade Runner mostly, I said before I went to see 2049 that if the movie is like gorgeous and has a really lush kind of world and the story's serviceable, then I would enjoy it and think it was a worthy sequel. And you know what? I got that. In fact, I think the story exceeded my expectations. I thought the story was just going to be very blah, and actually the story turned out to be more interesting than I anticipated, and did a couple of things that I would have been fine if they like went the traditional route with them even, but they kind of flipped them around to make something that was less expected than I thought. And so we could kind of dive right into it, I guess. I'm going to go into spoilers at some point, but not yet. And so let's just start off by saying that Denis Villeneuve and Roger Deakins, the director of photography who worked on this, who's like one of Hollywood's premier directors of photography. I mean, you pop up this guy's IMDb, it's like every movie that's worth mentioning, for the past, 20 years or something like that, including things that are really sort of, famously good looking or things like that, movies that have good visuals and good stuff like camera work and lit and movies that you kind of remember their look. And what they did here was really sort of take that idea of Blade Runner as that here we're giving you like a really dirty, gritty, like tactile world, and they really elevated the idea of that and gave us something that felt real. That sounds kind of like a weird truism, but I mean, rarely do you feel like a movie was entirely shot in real places when it's something this fantastical. Rarely do you get that sense where like, wow. I mean, my friend and I, after the movie, were talking about like, where did they shoot this? There's this scene where he's in this like gigantic, garbage dump kind of thing with like piles of metal in it, and it's clearly a real place. They went out and they found some place like in the desert that has just like piles of scrap metal or something like that, and it's an amazing location and it fits so well in the movie. And I'm sure there's like digital enhancements here or there, but I mean, and it's everything. It's from the cityscape shots to the city streets, and there's a bunch of different other locations that we don't really need to get into, but it's all of it feels very Blade Runner-y in terms of how real it is, and also how it all feels. It feels real, meaning it feels like you're looking at a physical object, but it also feels real in a sense that like it feels like a world. It feels like you're in a world that has like rules and laws and stuff. Which, again, is something that I would not take for granted. I mean, take something like Avatar, right, which is a sci-fi movie and like the most successful movie ever. It feels like the world of Avatar like has no set of laws. Like it feels like the human beings there just do whatever they want and can do whatever they want. Hey, they can kill their own scientist because she's a traitor. And the only like law of the land there is like you're a soldier, you're part of the army there, so you got to do what the general says. But there's no like code of conduct. Like the general's like, hey, shoot that man, and now you got to shoot him. It's like, the Nazis or something like that. But yeah, this world felt like a real world. Like there's a scene in it. Again, this is not a spoiler. Where Ryan Gosling's character asks someone whether or not they did something, and they say to him that would be illegal. Like, and it was a very small line, but it really felt like a nice little touch. Like the way they said it, like not being cheeky, meaning like, no, I mean, you're not supposed to do that. And so you get this really rich world. And as I said, the story actually surprised me a little, but we're going to have to get into spoilers for that. So we're not going to go there quite yet. So let's focus again, like I said, on the visuals and the set design, and the prop design is just amazing. And they did a really good technological progression, because this movie takes place 30 years after the first Blade Runner. A really good progression of technology and architecture that feels like a natural progression of technology and architecture, and feels like I said, like there's more advanced stuff now, but it feels like it's just the newer generation of a lot of the stuff that we saw in the old Blade Runner, especially stuff like the cars, the guns. There's some more techie tech stuff that I'm gonna get into in a little bit. That feels good, and you know what? They even have sort of decent explanations. It's sparse, but they design a future history, like a future timeline of events between Blade Runner and this sequel. And it's, like I said, it's not super detailed. There's a few like key events that they focus on that also make all the stuff that happened between then and now kind of make more sense, and sort of make the world you see now a logical result of that world, if you understand what I'm saying. The cast is all great. Harrison Ford, which, it became a joke that he was like kind of stoic and he didn't give a shit anymore, like at the eve of his career. And then people said like, wow, he really brought his A game to The Force Awakens. That's nothing. He's really good in this. I mean, really good, like emoting seriously as an actor, showing like real emotion and a spectrum of emotion too, and doing like physical acting that I'm sure was very difficult for someone his age to do. Really, really good. And Ryan Gosling, I think, is great. I also think he's perfect for this kind of role because, stoic. Again, it's sort of a joke that he's kind of a stoic guy who never emotes, and that kind of comes into play in ways that you maybe don't expect here. Jared Leto, terrific. Robin Wright, really, really good too. And then also there's a couple of actresses, specifically Ana de Armas. She's a Cuban actress apparently, and she's in this, and I did not know her. And first of all, she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, I think. And second of all, like, she's really good. Again, we're gonna have to get into spoilers to discuss her character more. But just a really pitch perfect performance for what she was supposed to be. There's another actress in this who plays another sort of key role that I don't want to get into, and I believe her name is Sylvia Hoeks, I believe. And she is, she's Dutch. I do believe this is her. She kind of looks different in the movie than she does here. Really, really strong performances. Some more like, what do you call it? Cameos, smaller roles by people like Dave Bautista, who's always good, and Edward James Olmos, a couple of other people, Mackenzie Davis. It's solid. The music by Hans Zimmer and someone else that I can't remember his name. Hans Zimmer and Benjamin Wallfish. Really good, and also not overused, which was kind of a fear for me because of Hans Zimmer, because sometimes his scores are really, really, really present, and here they were, but they were also interspersed with a lot of moments that didn't have a lot of music or any music, and so it made them accents rather than sonicscapes. But there was also sonicscapes, that iconic Blade Runner, like flying through the city with like this music playing. They do play on that idea here too, but they also do things that are kind of more novel a little, which I appreciated. Again, taking things from the original and maybe homaging them or doing versions of them, and then also kind of pushing the boundaries on those ideas outward, I think is the theme of this movie, in not just in the technical, but also like in the conceptual and the writing and such. So I think it's time for us to get into some spoilers. This video is running super, super long. I actually kind of plan to just do a quick like 10-minute, and this might be like a half-hour video, but so what? I mean, it might not be half hour. I don't know how much longer I'm going to talk. So I'm going to take a brief pause in spoilers. Look below in the comments to see if there's anything else after this. I'll put a time code. Probably not, though. And so we're just going to go right into spoilers after a few seconds of a break. Okay, spoiler time. So, I never know. It's funny. I always say like, okay, it's time for spoilers, and then I never know where to start from. Okay, Ana de Armas. Here's an interesting thing they did in this movie, because Blade Runner, like I said, is all about like humanity. Are you a human? What's real? What's not real? They even play on that a couple of times in the original Blade Runner, where he says to one of the replicant women, she has like a snake, and he says, "Is that a real snake?" And she says, you'd think I'd be working in a place like this if I could afford a real snake." Just a little touch about that gives you more peek into the world, but also gives you this whole thought about like what's real, what's not real, because the snake looks real. It just isn't, and they do that more here. So Ana de Armas, she plays this woman named Joy, and Joy's a product made by the Wallace Corporation, which is the thing that came after the Tyrell Corporation. The Tyrell Corporation went bankrupt. Never mind, I'm not going to tell you the whole thing. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you've either seen it or don't give a shit, and then in that case, it doesn't matter. So yeah, Tyrell is gone. Now you got this guy Wallace, and one of the products he puts out is this like AI called Joy. It's like a virtual girlfriend, I guess. And like he can like project her in his apartment and stuff. And she's like the perfect woman, because why wouldn't you make a product like that the perfect woman? And she really plays it well. And like Ryan Gosling, Kay, his name is kind of like this sort of lonely, pathetic replicant. And so he connects with this woman, and it helps push this whole idea of like, is love? Is love real? Is this person real? Are her emotions real? Because she displays real emotions in it. And when she's about to, spoiler alert, be killed, be crushed, her little emanator is going to be crushed. The last thing she does is like she emotionally tells Kay she loves him. But is that real? Probably not. I mean, I think the implication is that it isn't. I think the implication is that she's a product that's designed to be the perfect woman for you. And I kind of liked how that contributed to that whole idea of like being real and unreal. And so the thing about the story that I thought was most surprising is that it's flipped. Okay, so in Blade Runner, the whole idea is like memories, right? The memories are fake. Rachel's memories are fake. They're Tyrell's niece's memories from when she was a girl. They implanted him in her. And then part of the idea of like making a better replicant is giving them like real memories and them not knowing that they're replicants. Now, in the future, that serves a slightly different purpose. But here they take that premise and flip it on its head, where now Ryan Gosling, who's a replicant, starts to suspect that his fake, quote unquote, fake memories are not fake, and that he's actually real. I mean, he's like was born to a replicant, which is something that's supposed to be impossible. And so he thinks he's Rachel's son. He thinks he starts to believe that these childhood memories of his are actually his real childhood memories, which was a nice twist. And I thought, okay, cool. But then they flipped it again, which I think was my favorite thing about the whole movie, is when they flip it at the end and he discovers that it isn't him. He has the fake memories of this real person who's a woman who was Rachel's daughter and is actually the first child born to a replicant. And so that was great because there was this whole thing about him being special, not wanting a real name because he didn't feel like he deserved a real name, and then Joy giving him the name Joe. And then later there was a brilliant little touch where he sees like an interactive ad for her after his Joy is now dead, and she calls him Joe. Randomly, she says like, "Oh, you look like a nice Joe," or something like that. And then you realize like even the name she picked for him was like somehow part of her programming. It's very dark in that sense. It's sort of very nihilist in the way that in the end our character isn't special. In the end our character, it's true that in the end our character does save in a way. Makes it so that this girl who was born to Rachel and Deckard could maybe lead the replicant rebellion, which we don't know if will ever happen, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is, like I said, humanity and the idea of a soul and the idea of what's real and what's not real and what's free will and what's slavery and all kinds of sort of interesting questions like that. And like I said, it tackled them in a more creative and interesting way than I even thought that it would. And then together with, like I said, this sort of rich, dense, tactile world where you could smell it and you could feel that world. Just a really good job overall. I'm sure lots of people won't like this and think it's mind-numbingly boring and too long and all kinds of crap like that, which is fine because even like I said, the original Blade Runner, when people went to see it in 1984 or whatever, that's what they thought. It was weird. They also changed it for the cinematic release, but we don't have to go into the various cuts of Blade Runner right now. But neither the original nor this are what I would call particularly mass appeal movies. And I personally, I like the fact that we're getting actually science fiction movies that have decent budgets and have wide releases, but are conceptually not wide release movies. They're slower, they're more deliberate. Arrival was like that. There was this whole controversy about Darren Aronofsky's movie Mother, and I thought that I would like to see more movies like that, even though that movie failed and was and had its faults conceptually, which led to it failing. But the idea of taking chances on movies like that and saying, you know what, like I said, it failed in that case, but taking a chance carries with it the inherent risk of failure. But I do predict a lot of people will go and say, But as I said, I think it's probably the best sequel they could have done. I loved what Hideo Kojima said about it. He said it wasn't a copy of Blade Runner, it was a replicant, which I think is a really interesting concept when you think about it, because it really isn't as rehashy as some of the recent ones. They do have a little bit, they bring out Rachel to try to like get Deckard to talk. They're like, hey, we could bring your Rachel back. Here she is, brand new Rachel. And he's like, no, her eyes were green or whatever. And then Jared Leto says to his assistant, just get rid of her. Pow, shoots her in the head, like right there. Which I also thought was an interesting thing, like how disposable these things are in Jared Leto's eyes. They're just these things, and his only concern is he can't make enough of them at once. And so he really wants to crack that code of having replicants reproduce by themselves, but not for the purpose of humanity. My friend smartly said, my friend Fall Dog, who's also on Twitter, you go check him out, said smartly, the replicant rebels and Wallace have the same plan. They both want to get replicants to evolve to the point where they can reproduce on their own, but the reasons for it are opposite. The replicants say like, we're gonna evolve to our next step and we're gonna rise up and become free, and Wallace just wants that as a means to increase their numbers. And he even has this whole thing about every civilizational advance is built upon the backs of disposable labor, and just this view of his that they're less than nothing. And yeah, good villainous performance. It had a little bit of action, but not too much. I was a little afraid they were going to do a little too much action, but it didn't. It had, a couple of fist fights. It had a couple of gun fights that weren't, it had a teeny tiny bit of like martial artsy kicking. It had like one kind of car chase-ish, and that's about it. Like, very sparse action that wasn't like super flashy or whatever. It served the story. Like, there was a point to it. It wasn't like, okay, replicant, I'm gonna flip around and kick 3 people. No. I did like how quickly Ryan Gosling's instincts were, like when he shot people. Like, he would shoot very accurately and in rapid fire, pow, 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 like fire like 5 shots and drop like 5 guys. I like that. And again, subtle, not overused, just to show you that he has these skills. And that's about it. Yeah, Blade Runner 2049. I'm gonna love owning this movie on Blu-ray. I'm sure the behind the scenes stuff for it is gonna be great. And yeah, I mean, if like I said, visual storytelling. This, I said to my friends, this was the Ghost in the Shell movie I wanted. Because when I think Ghost in the Shell, this is what I think of. I think long, brooding shots, contemplations about where the artificial ends and the real begins. Really interesting future visuals and technology. And like a mystery, like a cop mystery. That's Ghost in the Shell to me. And that's what this movie delivered, and Ghost in the Shell sort of didn't. Speaking of which, there was one shot I loved that I just got to give a direct shout out to. There's a scene where they're flying over the city. It's kind of early on in the movie, and you see the sprawl, and it looks like suburban sprawl, like houses. You know how, like, if you see an aerial shot of like LA, you see like the city center, and then off into the distance it stretches like single story homes, and it looks like that's what you're seeing. But then as the camera shifts slightly, you realize what you're looking at is the tops of all of the skyscrapers. And so what you think are the streets in between the houses are actually kind of canyons. And once the perspective kind of changes and you realize that's that, all of a sudden the entire city gains this like additional dimension of size. And it's really well done visually and just stunning, because everything, again, is through like sheets of rain and these weird angles, and it's dark and yet they're able to do these kind of reveals of size that were just really, really impressive. Go watch Blade Runner. I loved it. And that's all I have to say about that. So check me out. Neon Taster on Twitter. The Twitter account for the podcast itself is at neoncast, and there's also an email address, neoncastpod@gmail.com. The YouTube channel that all of this stuff is brought to you on is youtube.com/c/neontaster, and also for the rare occasion that I might do a Twitch stream in the future, twitch.tv/neontaster. So that's all. Hopefully I'll see you again soon sometime, maybe for Thor Ragnarok, maybe before, who knows. So thanks for listening if you have been listening, and if not, then why am I talking to you?